we go. All right, so now we're going to look at the astrology of today. I briefly, during the meditation, mentioned that this polarity between the sun and the moon is this tension between authority and this kind of nurturance. That's really like this, this energy of the paternal, patriarchal, you could even say Capricorn energy, which is very dominant in our culture currently, and the tension of the sun, which is in the maternal, the nourishing and sort of more soft feminine energy of Cancer. So this is what makes a full moon. There's always an opposition between a moon and a sun, and that is the sun illuminating the moon, which is why we can see it in the sky. And that's why we don't see the new moon, because the moon itself is too close to the sun, so it gets completely blotted out by the sun. In this particular configuration, this moon is also highlighting a tension point that has been highlighted for a number of years already, especially 2020 and 2021, where it's not exactly on the same degree, but it's close to the degree where we've started to see all of this kind of chaos around the pandemic, which was actually the 23rd degree. This is at the 21st degree, into the 22nd degree of Capricorn. And we want to know the degrees because it tells us to what extent things are related. So the planets are the one thing, the signs are telling us a little bit more detail, but the degree tells us how deeply these things are connected amongst each other. This moon is also, the sun rather, is conjunct Mercury. And so when the sun is conjunct Mercury, we can also see that a lot of our communication and thinking is around this aspect, which is the sun in Cancer, which is food, nourishment. Are we safe? Are we secure? Have we got what we need to feel secure? This has been something that has been certainly generalized. It's definitely kind of been thrown up in my life. All of this idea, Cancer also represents home. Where do I live? How do I live? Do I feel safe? Emotionally, particularly. Capricorn is like the outer needs. It's the material stuff of life. Sort of Capricorn goes out and earns the money and brings it home, and Cancer does something with that. It's preparing the classical sort of male-female polarity in that sense. But Cancer is also much more. It's very much in tune with our inner psychology and our emotions and how we relate emotionally to the world. Capricorn is very much about get on with it. Don't talk about emotions. Don't go there. And in fact, even if you do feel emotions, suck them up and just sort yourself out. And you know, it's very difficult with Capricorn to find empathy. They feel very strong. A person with Capricorn moon in their life has a very strong sense of duty, morality, obligation. They are often lacking mother's love. They're often lacking in the affection that would have allowed them to feel this. Their mother was not, it's not that I shouldn't say love, mother's nourishment, perhaps. The love is not the question. It's not whether you were loved or not, but whether you were cared for in a way that made you feel nurtured and safe and so on, like a Cancer would want. So that Capricorn energy is very strong right now. So not just today, but overall in our era. The last couple of years, it's been extremely powerful because Pluto is also there. And Pluto has been in that part of the chart since end of 2007, beginning of 2008. And Pluto has been going through this energy of patriarchy and domination through the material world and what we consider to be the structure of our material world for these past 14 years, basically. And so it's coming towards the end of the sign. It's 6 degrees away from this moon, which is a very big orb. Normally for some event like this, we would want to see, especially the moon moves very quickly, we would want to see more like 2 degrees, maybe 3 degrees of conjunction to really say this is significant. And of course, the closer, the more, and we can be clear about that. But because Pluto is not only really slow moving, but also it's actually retrograde, which means it's moving slowly towards the moon. And the moon within 8 hours of this full moon, meaning tonight, so the full moon is at 8:38, so it's in just roughly an hour from now at the fullest peak. And about 8 hours from now, so around 5-ish in the morning, is when the moon and Pluto come together. And this is significant because it's very quick after the moon, so we can consider that this also is a part of this lunation. It's part of this energy of the moon. Pluto on the moon is massive emotional baggage, it's emotional turmoil. Pluto is very much about power and transformation. It's very much about the hidden aspects of what we feel, what we don't realize we feel. It's everything that's kind of swept under the rug. The things that frighten us, it's also Pluto. So this kind of exacerbates this tension already that I've been trying to illustrate between feeling emotionally secure, feeling materially secure, feeling socially secure. Capricorn also represents the social side of our life, meaning how society sees us. It's not like our interaction, it's kind of our status. It's how we present ourselves. And so all aspects of that, including leadership, governance, banking, all the things that are like status in our society, educational institutions would fall into that, for example. And so moon conjunct Pluto, opposing this moon, and then at the same time, it's worth pointing out that the moon is also, again, the degrees are not really close. It's not as close as I would want it. For example, in a birth chart, I would be a little bit more generous, but in a fleeting chart like this, it's still a wide orb, but I'm including it because of the circumstances of this week and the 2 coming weeks. Chiron is in a T-square, which means Chiron is squaring both the sun and the moon from Aries. It's about 16.5 degrees of Aries, so it's still about 5 degrees off the moon and the sun. But I think it matters partly because what I said earlier, the moon is moving so quickly that actually the moon and Chiron will be conjunct by next Monday. And so I think we're going to see that some of the suffering or the energy that we're feeling already in the next few days is going to come to a kind of a peak, Monday, Tuesday of next week, where we're going to have a sense of, okay, this is feeling, it feels hard now. Things feel hard. This is what I need to take care of. This is what I need to look after. I think this is one of the big messages of this time, is that we have to become more self-reliant. That's always the case. I think in our culture, perhaps in our modern era, we've become less self-reliant than any of our ancestors, where our ancestors were much more kind of generally taking care of their needs. They would grow a little food, or they would be very close to the person who grew their food. There was always a tight community. And we've grown basically in the last century, or we could maybe say the last 150, 200 years at the most, we've grown further and further and further away from how we take care of ourselves in a fundamental way. And so there's this underlying kind of social schism as well, this kind of social anxiety, because we're not hands-on in terms of our own security. Even in the face of insecurity, people knew, okay, there was a drought, now I know what I need to do. Whereas we're kind of beholden to corporations or again, the climate, of course, and so on. This Chiron represents healing. It represents the wound as well as the healing of the wound. It's the pain point, psychologically or physically, sometimes physically, very, very literally. But Chiron in Aries is very much about the pain around our individuality, the sense of individuality. And I think this is also an interesting thing that this T-square is pulling up, because the pain point, let's say, is that we are too separate, that we are too individualistic, that we aren't really looking after ourselves, that we've lost something in our social connection. This is a very, very emotional time. So the moon on Pluto exaggerates that emotionality, even though Capricorn is not emotional. Pluto is opposing the sun, and very soon will be in an exact opposition. So by Monday, Tuesday, Pluto will be exactly opposing the sun, and eventually the sun moves into Leo. So I think it's 17, 18, 19. So I think next Thursday, the sun moves into Leo, but basically all of next week, the Pluto is opposing the sun. That's always going to be highlighting something, in this case, Cancer, about our emotions. This happens every year, but it's triggered at this particular point by this energy of the full moon, what is trying to highlight. The other aspect of the full moon is that it is also triggering the nodes, the north and south nodes. So those nodes right now are just over 20.5 degrees. So they're moving into the 21st degree. So that is a very tight orb. So we have a 21 degree and 21 minutes full moon. And then we have a 20 degree and 41 minute north and south node. And that is affecting by trine. So that's a little bit more, it's not as intense in terms of pressure, but whenever the nodes, and trine and by sextile. So the south node is sextiling the moon, and it is trining the sun, and the north node is trining the moon and sextiling the sun. And so, so what this means is that there's an added layer of kind of karmic or destined energy here. We're coming into a phase. Remember that this is the peak phase of the new moon that started 2 weeks ago, but it's also the peak phase of the moon that we had the new moon in Capricorn on the 2nd of January. And so here we're kind of coming to a place where we're examining, we're seeing in the light of what's happened in the last 6 months of what started or what may have been triggered in early January. We're seeing now the consequences or the effects that that's having on us. So it's an important time to really find space and time for your emotions and try and understand, because we're all living through this kind of anxiety soup. The tension that's in the people around us and society around us, on the news, and every sort of media is pushing this kind of intense energy. It's extremely destabilizing and very draining. And once you get the nodes involved, it becomes even more so. And so this particular moon, this day, this period around the moon of a few days, is very, very intense, very emotionally intense. We also have Uranus, which is close to conjunct, it's effectively conjunct the North Node. Uranus moved into Taurus in 2018, in May, I think end of April 2018 for the first time. And Uranus in Taurus is again about this instability in what keeps us nourished, in the food supply, in agriculture, in the environment. Taurus is everything that sustains us. It's money systems as well. So for the last 4+ years, we've really been going through massive change in that regard. And this is being triggered in a very big way this month, July and August. And so in that triggering, we're seeing already that the moon is highlighting this. And so we're seeing already now what we can expect to become even more intense by the 31st of July, where the energy then starts to peak and we start to get even more intense, because then Mars will join up with Uranus and the North Node. I'll talk about that shortly, but just to highlight that this particular time is difficult. It's not totally, I don't even need to tell you that, but astrologically, it's really clear that we are going through this kind of existential crisis. And what is really, what is really important, what I want to, sorry for those of you online as well who are unnerved, but I want to point out that as humans, we have gone through cycles of this forever. We have gone through these major cycles of upheaval that are being tracked and followed by many interesting historians, sociologists, geologists, because some of these cycles are also they're more to do with global conditions, the planetary conditions, not human conditions. So we're just subjected to that. And so this is one of those times. We are in this kind of period of time where it is so intense, and yet at the same time we've added to that intensity by being literally the only sort of group of humans that has chosen to extinguish ourselves and has chosen to continue to perpetuate behavior that is actually literally slowly killing ourselves. And so we are in this really intense phase, but it's not the first time. So if you go through history, through tens of thousands of years, there have been civilizations and then they disappear. You can go from South America through Africa to Mesopotamia to Babylon to parts of India, Australia. There are cultures that rose, that were thriving for thousands of years and then disappeared. And we are not special. This is the thing to understand. We're not different to any other previous experience of humanity. Because we become so comfortable, because we have all of these comforts that we don't really have to think about our existential threat, we're not really prepared for the genuine hardship of life. People don't even really see death in their typical life either. They don't see where people previously were dying in their own bedrooms, and people would be locally, coming to say hello and goodbye and whatever. We don't see this anymore. So we're completely numb to all of this. And I really feel that spiritually we need to dive into it. We need to go into that fear, go into that sense of fragility, not with this sense of panic, but with a sense of, how can I remember who I really am? And so this is where the spiritual practice becomes very strong, to understand I am not this singular experience of life. I am part of this whole consciousness. I am part of this entire system. Notice, by the way, that, was it 2 days ago maybe, NASA published some quite extraordinary photos and some pictures of the galaxies that are mind-blowingly far away, and also with a real precision, which allowed us to see for the first time some stars and galaxies that would never have been able to be understood or known about. And that's still not the end of the story. And they're only going back, I think it was 5 billion years or something, and they go on the assumption that the Earth is sort of 5.5 billion years old. So they're still going to try and go back in time and see how it all began. So of course, this is the materialist way of looking at things, like there's a beginning point and an ending point. The truth is that it's all cyclical. Things are moving in cycles. We can't possibly grasp that with our little experience of life, with our solitary little bodies and our mind that grasps onto small, close things that we can touch and see and feel. And so it's extremely important that you find in your own practice this way of shedding this idea that there is something in you that is separate from all of this and that is somehow finite, that there is this you that you are is not finite. It's part of the whole of this picture. The form that you are will change, no doubt, and the form that we have as a culture, as humanity, will also change. The form of this planet is likely to change as well. But what is really extraordinary, I think, for these times is that if we can, rather than falling prey to the fear and the anxiety that everybody is experiencing, and that people are being driven in a way to kind of madness, to craziness and violence and upset, that we come back to the place where we just know that we are all part of this, that there is no beginning and end, and this is a continuation. And much as I said earlier about the lineage of the Guru, there's no beginning and end. It's just coming in and going out. It's a continuation. And if you focus more of your awareness, focusing on the consciousness through which we experience everything, rather than focusing on the mind and the egoic self, the emotional needs. If we look at Cancer, Capricorn, the material needs, the emotional needs, the neediness, the idea of security as a way of making ourselves feel safe then we recognize that actually we're fooling ourselves that we can ever genuinely be safe, because it's never been about that. It's not about the stuff or the conditions. It's not about the life form or the health or the material well-being. It's that we are just participating in all of it. So these times are extreme, and that requires an extreme attitude on our part, that we look at the energy of the current times as our greatest guru, as our greatest teacher. And then we start to notice, where am I holding myself in this pattern of fear, or in a pattern of anxiety, or in a pattern of, even self-sabotage, because I have this idea about how things should be around me, how things should appear, or how I should experience my life, my home, whatever the thing might be. Being fluid at this time, being supple, being quite easy going in terms of what is possible both in the future as well as for you now, is really the salvation. We see also that Saturn is in what is called a semi-sextile to this moon, and Saturn is in Aquarius. So this energy of Saturn in Aquarius began with a bit of a bang in December, I think 21st of December 2020, because it joined up with Jupiter and created a big new cycle, about 20 years. And Saturn in Aquarius is very much about restriction around society, restriction around our capacity to engage with one another in community, in networks, and so on. And Saturn in Aquarius is also about structuring all of that, restructuring. Saturn is always wanting something to be next level. So it's every time it passes through a sign, it's leveling up, restructuring, shedding what is old and unwelcome. Now, Saturn was in Aquarius in the beginning of the 90s, so 29 years ago, 29 years ago. And at that time, we had a real innovation. There was a massive change around the global sort of structures around East and West Europe, for example. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and then the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. The massive shifts that were epochal shifts. We're now seeing another end of that. We're seeing something that is now an answer to all those changes. That included, by the way, the introduction of the World Wide Web. That the invention of the web happened when Saturn moved into Aquarius. And so a lot of these things that we take for granted today were revolutionary, changing society, changing the way that we were collectively, how we communicated and engaged with each other worldwide. And now we're in this same thing, the same kind of questioning. So what does that look like? Saturn is always about limitation. And so there can be also the tendency, because Saturn, by the way, rules Capricorn. So that Saturnian energy of patriarchy, patriarchal sort of control, or taking care of other people's business, like making sure that they organize other people's business, whether they want that or not. And so here we have the same effect here with Saturn. Saturn rules Aquarius anyway, traditionally, but with Saturn in Aquarius, it's very much about constricting engagement. We've seen that with free speech in a massive way already in the last 10 years or so. Well, I would say I'd stretch it back probably more like 20, 25 years, but really in a rapidly accelerating way since Saturn entered Aquarius at the end of 2020. So that was when there were certain discussions around, for example, the pandemic or the vaccines, or and in this case now the war, all of these things that have some kind of intensity to them, and somebody's got some kind of skin in the game or money on the line, they are being blocked. We're not even able to have a normal conversation about certain things. And that is triggered by this moon. Saturn will be very quickly, so by midnight, Saturn will be in a semi-square with the moon, and then by Saturday, Saturn will actually be, the moon will be conjuncting the Saturn in Aquarius. And so it's a really important thing to understand this, this energy of, or actually it's even before, I think it's by Friday night, that Saturn and the moon collide. And so it's important to understand that this energy is part of the sort of cyclical change that we're going through, this lunar energy that we're feeling right now, that is triggering the bigger cycles. So the moon is always moving so fast, it triggers the new cycle, and something is coming up in that regard. When it triggers that Saturn, it's going to, I think, be something to observe then for the next lunar cycle. Certainly until August, we have two very intense lunations in the end of July, 28th, I think, of July, and then the 15th of August, maybe it's 29th of July, and 15th of August, which are very disruptive as well. So basically what we're looking at now, this energy of the moon is kind of a flashpoint, if you like, of the period of time between now and the solstice, not solstice, the equinox of September, where we're really up for about 2 more months of intense transformation, instability, and change. So, so the other aspect of this is, hang on, let me just go, I'm going to go back to, I think I'll go towards the end of the month to already start to look at this shift between, so I've gone too far, at the conjunction of Mars and Uranus. And so it starts out with the conjunction of Uranus and the North Node, exact on the 31st of July. Mars is already there. And all of this, by the way, already applies. It's just more of a question of intensity. So what I'm saying now is already in application, certainly as of next week, but it becomes more intense. And by the 31st of, the 1st of August, then there is this exact conjunction between the North Node and Mars and Uranus. Now, why is that significant? It's because this is, I'm going to just remove the full moon so we can be more clear. There we go. So why is this significant? It's because this happens so rarely. So already the triple conjunction happens very rarely in any sign, but in the sign of Taurus, all 3 of them together, it hasn't happened since 325 BC. So it's something that is unusual. It's something that is very powerful. And the 3 players involved are the North Node, which is about change, karmic change, destiny, if you like, things that really just have to happen, going in a new direction, expanding in a new direction. The planet Mars is about division, separation, sudden action as well. So stimulating energy, very strong stimulating energy, which can be assertion and outgoingness, and it can also be aggression, it can be war. So this is another factor that we're contending with now. And then Uranus, which is similar to the North Node, meaning that the energy can change very quickly, things are sudden and unexpected, things happen through insight as well. So on a personal level, I think these things will be much more easy to tolerate than on a collective level. On the global level, it's always a little bit more tricky because this energy involves so many different components. Will tend to bring out the worst side of that aspect, and on the personal level, this can actually be really great. And so what we're looking for is wherever you find Taurus in your chart, this is where that big change will be. And so you want to look between 18, let's say 17 and 19 degrees, because there you really want a tight orb for that to have a real strong impact. It's going to impact you anyway in the sign of Taurus, regardless of wherever that is for you. But if you have any planets at 17, 18, or 19 degrees, especially of the fixed sign, meaning Taurus, Leo, and Scorpio, and then Aquarius, if that's your case, then this will be very significant for you. This is also squaring good old Saturn at the same time, and that's very significant as well, because Saturn again is this energy of challenge. It's again, that's a bigger orb. That's almost a 4-degree orb, but still, I think very, very relevant, because both Uranus and Saturn are in a square formation since last year, and that's part of this big shifting disruption between this this new way and the old way that is really teetering on collapse. When the North Node, Mars, and Uranus come together, oh, by the way, the degree of Uranus, the 18th, roughly the 18th degree of Uranus, will be like hanging around, because Uranus is then slowly, by mid-August, I didn't, all of my notes are at home. I don't have them with me. So by the middle of August, let's say, Uranus is going retrograde. That might be something like the 20th or 24th of August. I can't remember exactly the date, but it is in that retrogradation. It slows down to station retrograde, and then it very, very slowly starts to move backwards. And because it's so slow, it's pretty much one whole month on the same degree, because it takes time. It's like a giant steamliner that needs to turn, and it takes like 3 days to change direction if you're a big boat. And so Uranus is going to be at that 18-degree point, which what that means is that each time a planet, a faster moving planet, including the moon, goes to that point, it's going to trigger this episode of the end of the month. And each time it does that, then we're going to see some repercussion. And this triggering action will last through April of next year. So this is an ongoing thing. It's about 9 months of results, let's say, of all of what we're experiencing right now. We're going to start to really see how things are taking shape. March is going to be a significant month, March 2023. April will be very significant equally, but it'll be different, it'll be new. This 18-degree point of Uranus is a new point that it's entered into. It hasn't been at that degree point for 84 years. And so Uranus came almost up, I think it came up to something like 17 degrees, then went retrograde, then came back, and it's now just cleared where it turned retrograde, and it's now moving into a new degree over the last few weeks. For the first time, as I said, in 84 years. What this means is that whatever is happening at the end of the month, beginning of August, which, by the way, as I mentioned, is already kind of happening, so look out for it. It is new. It's not something we've experienced before. It's not something that we can say, oh yeah, but we knew that was going to happen. This is going to be some new event, new big development. And again, difficult to predict if it's going to be positive. My tendency would be to say no, and that this is actually going to be quite a shakeup. And again, for an individual, depending on your chart, depending on how Mars is in your chart, depending on where this is happening for you and how it's triggering other planets, this can also be positive. I don't want you to think that it's going to be, but we, of course, belong to this collective, and we will be one way or another affected by it. The symbolism of that is, again, about financial markets. It's about currency as well, how we use money, how that is controlled. So interestingly, maybe three days ago or so, there was an interview with an independent German journalist, a young woman who is actually in Donetsk in Ukraine. And she is trying to report on what's actually happening in Ukraine, and she continues to be muted by the German media. They're not posting anything that is negative towards Ukraine. They're not allowed in Germany now. You cannot talk about the Nazi movements in Ukraine. That's forbidden. You will be charged with anti-Semitism if you do that for some reason. And in her case, she had 1,600 euros taken out of her account by the German authorities, as a kind of a fine for disseminating this information. So there is this real omerta now. You've got this real control of how people are able to express themselves. A British fellow who was also there with her as a colleague had his bank account closed in Germany, and he's not able to register a new bank account anywhere else in Europe because the network, the banking network, is supporting each other. So we're in a new phase here where we're no longer in a place where we actually know when we might take a wrong step or a right step that we're following. We don't even know anymore what is the law, because the laws are no longer being followed. This is like Wild West all around the world. So we're in a really interesting point where we have to start to create, and this could be one of the impacts of this thing, is that we're creating new systems of barter and money exchange, a new financial system. This is what the idea of Bitcoin was originally. Bitcoin has been 100% sort of assimilated by the banking system, by the government, now pretty much under control of all of that. Even if they won't admit it, but we need something different because we are no longer able to rely on what we thought we could. We thought our money was our own. It's not. We thought we could speak our mind. We can't. This we expected all through decades of totalitarianism in certain countries or different places where there was much more social conditioning. But we always had the illusion that this was not the case in many Western countries. And now we can absolutely see that this is the case. So we are in a completely different set of values. Taurus is also values. It's very much about what we find important, both in what we value in terms of the stuff that we have, but also what we value in terms of how we support ourselves, how we interact with people. And then, of course, food is another aspect of this. So we're already looking, before this event has even peaked, we're seeing that Italy has had massive drought. It's the worst in 70 years. And that there's now very likely to be problems with olive oil and other products that people take for granted that are basic products for nourishment. And it's obviously not just Italy. Spain is in the same position. France is in a similar position. Many parts of the United States are in a similar position. So we are in an unknown territory, and this event at the end of July, beginning of August, triggers a new era that is something that is very, very difficult to foresee or to predict. And so really, it sounds super banal to say it, but expecting the unexpected and recognizing that this is part of this disruptive energy where we're really not in a position to live from the basis of what we thought we knew before. So we now really have to change how we live. Taurus is also, it's a money house in many ways. That axis between Taurus and Scorpio is also about exchanges. So the South Node in Scorpio is also touching on the idea of secrets. That's not the only aspect. This Moon-Pluto aspect is another thing about the exposure, let's say, of secrets. And especially when the Moon conjuncts again Saturn and then opposes Mercury, which it will do shortly, within 2 days, there will probably be more revelations of certain things. We've already seen that even just this week. There's been some really interesting disruptions in terms of Uber, these revelations around Uber and how they were working behind the scenes in lobbying different governments and the European Commission and so on. But it just goes way beyond all of that. And so we're more and more, I think we can expect this as the days wear on, and especially in this July-August period, that we will have some revelations that can also, and this is another aspect of this North Node Mars-Uranus conjunction, can trigger violence. It can trigger eruptions like we've seen in Sri Lanka, where there's been this complete chaos and the government has been completely overthrown. And now the president seems to have left the country, and there's no government at the moment. And so the mobs are just roaming around trying to find food. There's no access to food. There's no access to foreign currency because the government leaders took all of the money that was in fact public money in terms of foreign currency. And so we will probably see more of this in other places as well. We've seen now in China this week, also issues around money, people struggling in mobs that were pushed back violently by the police, trying to get their money out of banks. So it's a similar situation to what I described about this German journalist who is all of a sudden your money's gone and shut down. So just as a reminder, 84 years ago, when Uranus was moving through Taurus the last time, that was the time of the Great Depression. That was the time period between 1933, was it 32 or 33 and 1940 or something like that, 41. It's a seven-ish years of Uranus in Taurus. And so we are not going to have exactly the same thing, but it is going to be very similar. So that was the Spanish Civil War. That was the build-up to the Second War. That was the massive poverty and death because of the Dust Bowl in the United States and the depression that spread in many parts of the world. The real antagonism of political forces in Germany because of the humiliation. And so we're seeing all of this now. It's a new character. It's maybe more Russia playing that role, but we're going to see some kind of explosive consequences to all of this. And I suspect that this end of this month, in the next 2-3 weeks, we will see how this might start to manifest. It is like a new moon phase in the sense that when these planets conjunct, whenever planets come together, it's starting something new. So when we see Uranus coming together with the North Node, that's something that we see every 18-ish years, 18, 19 years. It happens in the cycle of the nodes as they move around. So we can also look back on what was going on 18 years ago in our own lives, what was happening around that time, and how that may have affected us, 2004, 2005, what was going on in our lives. And then similarly with Mars and the North Node and Mars and Uranus, that's a 2-year cycle because it takes Mars that long to go around the clock face. And so either way, there's cycle upon cycle that is being layered. And when these multiple cycles kind of come together, we're adding to the emphasis of what the cycles mean. So Mars-Uranus is always a typical sign for earthquakes, for some kind of geological disruption, volcanic disruption, some kind of unsettled Earth activity, Earth-related activity. And Uranus and the North Node, similarly, there's a lot of triggers through wars, for example. Uranus-North Node was a factor in the Crimean War when Uranus conjuncted the North Node in 1855. It was the time where the Crimean War started, which now we're seeing reproduced in a slightly different form at the moment. And so all of that energy is somehow it's new, but at the same time, there's this echo of previous cycles. And so it's really interesting, I think, to explore through your own life, these times 2 years ago, 18 years ago, going back also to the early 90s, when Saturn was in Aquarius before, and what you might find in your own life that is kind of resonating with what it is that you now need to move away from, move into something different, moving towards something else. With the South Node in Scorpio as well, that can also be, as I mentioned, secrets, political secrets, things to do with sexuality. We're seeing a lot of discussion around sexuality, gender, this kind of thing. Scorpio is also deep fear. It's our fears, it's what we're traumatized by, it's taboo stuff. And so again, this is really about when the South Node is passing through there, it's shedding, letting go, change in the sense of letting go of something, change in the sense of, okay, that it's no longer valid. And so really trying to understand what kind of fear we hold, what, really know it on an intellectual level, on a psychological level, don't believe it, and understand to what extent you need to surrender it in this sense, to let it go so that you can feel like, okay, now I can be present to what is really going on here. I'm not creating this kind of drama around what I fear, but rather I'm dealing with what's actually happening. So realistic, being pragmatic is really the big solution here. I think the big theme. I'm just going to pause there and see if you have any questions, or if you want to know from your rising sign where that will affect you, including those of you who are on the Zoom call. You can unmute yourself. Don't want to traumatize anybody. So I have to, you may have noticed I'm not much of an optimist. I always considered myself to be a positive person and very optimistic. But I think we really have come to this place in our experience, this experiment on this planet, where we are really past the point of no return. And we are now going to see, we kind of glibly read about these plagues and inundations and all these things in the Bible or in other historical texts. Every culture talks about the water subsuming cultures around the world. We're in that stage. It's not even worth having this discussion whether it's man-made or it's cyclical. It is both, very likely. It doesn't even matter what degree it is, because we're getting to this point where we have so little amenability to change, where nobody with any sense of power or capacity, that's Capricorn, is actually taking action. So interestingly, I saw a headline that said from 2005, I think that was relevant to Canada, from 2005 until now, airplane emissions have gone up 75%. So in 2005, we were already talking about reducing emissions. That was the goal, right? The target was that. And again, I mean, that's just one example of thousands, but it's just not been done. And so that sense of, at a certain point, we have to realize that now we're no longer in this space of let's kind of pray, hold hands and know that everything is going to be fine. It's not. We have to now go into a modus operandi of what do I need to do for myself to stay well, to stay connected to the communities and the networks of support that I need, and to support others through this, that issue of being the student, learning, and then being the guru and sharing is highlighted here.
It's a bit like changing the question for yourself from what's happening or why is it happening to how can I move on or do something. It's a bit more like because like me, I feel there is this. I'm really into this why, and so anxiety producing because there is no big answers. So now I'm saying that I listen to think and I see teach Nathan and in a podcast it's like stop asking the why, just say how somehow. And you're like, oh, okay, I'll start trying, but it's very new to me because it's more like getting stuck at the why and I still freeze. What does it mean? Or why is that? What's the meaning? Or how? And it's actually more.
What now? So the why is always like a form of self-flagellation. It's like a torture. When you try and ask why, that's coming from the intellect that wants to know facts. And in fact, it's kind of like a delay technique. It's like a delay mechanism. It's like, I don't want to deal with the actual issue. I want to know, I want to understand it. And so there's this sense of It feels like taking action. It feels like it's a good thing to do. It feels like it's a good response, but it's a complete waste of time. We're beyond asking why. We know why. In many ways, we know why we're in a mess that we are. The point is that knowing why is not going to change the mess that we're in. And so we need to, like you said, go to the how. What now? What do I need to do now? How do I need to conduct myself, live my life? Honestly, especially with all of this emphasis until 2025, 26 is when Uranus moves out of Taurus. We still have this period of time, 3-4 years to go, where we're really going to have to look at self-sustaining communities, looking at food. How can we be sure that if we, that we have some kind of access to real food, and that we understand that there are limitations in terms of our finances and the money that we have, that people might have a sense of, this is I'm rich because I have all this money, or I have these investments, or I have that property, and it all can disappear tomorrow. And the truth is that was always the case. That was always the case. So we've seen now landslides because of massive rains, for example. You see it in Australia, you see it in parts of India, you see it in Burma, these landslides, and they take whole villages with it, just gone into the river. And we have this feeling, we're sitting there looking at these things on our phone or on our whatever device, and we think, oh, those poor people. And we have this kind of false sense that it's never going to happen to ourselves. And I think the more that we, without panicking, without going into that feeling of, Chicken Little, the fear and all that stuff, it's just recognizing, yeah, I'm fragile. Life is fragile. It always has been. So how do I want to live knowing that? And once you let's say control is, I mean that in the sense of focusing your mind to the how, then you start to realize actually there's less anxiety. So the idea that we ignore the possibility that we'll die, that we'll lose our money, that this will collapse, that the society is collapsing, all these things, it actually causes more anxiety because we're not actively doing something. And so the answer paradoxically is in what's next? What do I do now? How do I want to engage in this way?
And it is actually it's an advice or a suggestion from your side. This is because even that can be sometimes overwhelming. The how, what I can do, because it can be what can I do in 1 year or 5 years, but it's to follow. It's really like today, just like this morning. And there's something I need to learn a lot. It's like, oh my God, I'm just gonna focus on my breakfast.
This much you know.
But it's not it's really almost retraining myself to
we have to also, in that sense of simplifying and coming back to this present moment, we have to remind ourselves that we're not here to rescue everybody. We're not here to change everything. We're not here to be the savior of the planet. We have these kind of grandiose ideas, and I mean we collectively, all of us, each of us in our funny ways, unique ways, will have this idea that I should be doing more, I should be reaching out more, I should be developing much more. And if we go back in time, we see that actually it was never like that. Like if you go back a few centuries, everything was happening in a very limited space. And even people who would go to one or another country, they were acting in a very limited way. And those very small, limited actions, even what you could call local actions, had knock-on effects. And that would either tend towards the negative, if you like Genghis Khan or something like that, or it would tend towards the positive, if you were something like a Christ or another figure, Buddha, for example. You are only responsible for what you're doing in this moment and how you're doing it. How is there? How am I living? How am I sharing my emotion? Am I taking care of my emotions before I vomit them out onto everybody else or onto total strangers on the street? Am I taking care of my own well-being so that I don't burden others with my lack of well-being, for example? you know, insofar as we can't control all of those things, there's going to be events that happen that we can't predict, but we can always try in the moment to take care of how can I, in this moment, take care of myself so that I can be there for the people just here, just around. And this is, I think, the crazy paradox is that it's never been any different. It's never been anything but that. And yet in our modern life, we're exposed to so many things simultaneously that we think we've got to figure all of this out. We've got to sort the whole thing out. And actually it's those small everyday gestures that will start to have a knock-on effect that is entirely unpredictable. I'm sure Greta Thunberg, when she started sitting every Friday protesting her high school, not going to school, I'm sure she thought she was going to affect change within Sweden, hopefully, you know, in her community, within the teen world. I can imagine she didn't for 1 minute think that she was going to have a global impact. Not that it's having a sufficient impact, but she's still got conversations going and things are shifting, all because she decided to sit down. Notice she was not doing anything, just sitting down for a few hours every Friday. And so we don't know what the effects of what we do are, and so therefore we have to take everything that we do as something precious and important, whether it's having your breakfast and what you choose for your breakfast, or how you take care of your emotions in the moment. It's going to have an effect on people around you, because we're not alone, we're not isolated ever. The one bigger challenge in our era is not managing, but living with the instability of other people. That people are deeply unstable, people are deeply wounded, and there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of violence and anger, and so we also have to prepare ourselves to be able to somehow be in the face of that. I went to the center of town yesterday because I had to pick up a package which was delivered to like the least convenient postal drop-off place in all of Brussels compared to where I live. And so on the Avenue de la Couronne, not far from, I don't even know why it was this area, but not far from the Commission and Parliament area, close to Chaussée de Wavre, there were just dozens of police officers and security officers, and there was no obvious reason, and it just felt really insecure. I couldn't tell what was going on. They were all kind of milling around, and there must have been 40 of them, like on the corner, little pockets of them in the space of that not even half a block. And I just had this feeling of, God, what next? Like, what now is coming? Because you're just going about your day, going to this ridiculous post office, that not even post office, but place, and it's somewhere you would normally never go, and then you by accident find yourself in the middle of something. Nothing happened incidentally, but you don't know why this is all going on, and you're just there going to pick up your package, and so this kind of thing, we need to be able to prepare ourselves for this expecting the unexpected always, and say, well, I'm participating in this world, I'm participating, so somehow karmically it's part of my life. I can't say that that's over there, that's wrong. It's all karmically part of what I'm participating in. We have this taking steps back. This is how I ordered the package, then that got sent, delayed, then I had to go pick it up on that particular day when I had time. So all of that is my karma. And that, again, it's not a judgment. We have to understand the meaning of karma is simply that it's things that happen as a consequence of things that have already happened. And that can be collective, and that can be individual, and that can be historic, like we see, for example, in Crimea right now. So all of these things collide at a certain point, where then there's a point where something happens, and we don't know what that's going to be. So it can go in the direction of something positive or neutral, and then it can go in the direction of something challenging or negative. And so it's the urgency here is your practice, keeping that awareness, keeping that sense of what is real, what is known in the highest sense of the word, knowledge. Right. So let's see. Are there any questions coming from our Zoom people? Does anybody want to know about their chart, for example? If you know your rising sign, I can tell you the location in the chart. Where's your rising sign?
Rising sign is the primary sign.
It's the first house of the chart, so it's not where this. I can do it from the sun as well. That will be a certain indication, but the rising sign will be more of a more powerful.
Is it like a ascendant?
Yes, ascendant, exactly. Yes.
The sun is Cancer and ascendant is Virgo.
Okay, yeah. So we can have a look then. I'll go back. I'll start. Well, maybe the most pressing thing. The moon is one thing. This is one element of this, but I think maybe the most pressing thing is this triple conjunction in Taurus. So in Virgo, that is going to be. Hang on, I need to just calculate. So 2, 3. Oops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it's the 9th house. That's very interesting because that can have something to do with a new sense of purpose, a new sense of where the path that you're on, kind of where do you want to go. That's the house of Dharma. The 9th house is also foreign countries, foreign relations, potentially moving abroad, or an opportunity that comes from abroad, events that happen abroad that affect you in your experience. It's with Cancer, it means that it's sextiling your sun, so it could actually be something quite interesting, quite positive, because that's not in a hard aspect to your sun. I don't know the degree of your sun, but it's not a hard aspect. So that can actually be something quite interesting if it would be the sun. It represents often the career. It can also be the father, and so there could be something, a new development in that regard. That is unexpected. The 9th house is what you believe. It's what you. It's like your philosophy of life. What do I feel life is about? A little bit like what we've just discussed here. This kind of notion of am I seeing things in the way that is helpful to me and helping me go forward? It's also interesting. It's an aspect of because it's for you on the 3rd house and 9th house axis, and that is publishing. So it could be an interesting thing where you publish. You might decide to publish a book, you might decide to teach or start new studies, for example. If you did, this would be a really good time to start. It would be something that would be really useful. You also have, you will have the added impact of Mars in the 10th house for 7 months. So there's something around career for sure, or something around how you're socially engaging or social status, because Mars from the 20th of August until April is going to be in your 10th house of career. So there's a lot of activity there for you. Perhaps you're a Pisces. Your Sag sun, Cancer rising? Was it Pisces rising? Cancer rising. So Cancer rising, this is in the 11th house of friends and groups and networking, like knowing people, not so much dear friends, but the people in your surroundings. That can be networks of colleagues or people that you associate things with, like politically or spiritually or whatever. It's also the house of hopes and wishes and dreams. It's the house of what we want out of life, and that's changing. And so even if you think you know, even if you think you know, yeah, that's actually a very favorable house. I actually have this because I'm also Cancer rising. And it's, but God knows what's going to happen. I make no declaration.
We're still in the fog.
Yeah, for sure. Don't try and figure it out until retrospectively. But what is very possible is that by the end of July, beginning of August, or at any time, sort of around that time or thereafter, you may have new insights, because again, Uranus is, and the North Node is really about some insight, flash of knowledge, flash of awareness, something new coming in, and having a sense that actually this is what I want, or somebody coming towards you and saying, have you ever thought of this, that you would never have considered, but it's now this opportunity is there. And so having that sense of what is my goal, these are life goals, these are long-term goals, long-term dreams and hopes and wishes. It's also a money house. So there can be some issue around how you earn money. So the 11th house is the money you earn from the career that you have. So there can be a change in that regard as well. You could have your bank accounts frozen by the government for no reason, for example. Watch what you post on social media if you want to keep your money. So just that's one example. And so the axis is the 11th house, and then the opposite side where the South Node is the 5th house. In that case, it's potentially something that is being shed or changing or being altered in your children's lives. Like there's something that shifts in their life that doesn't necessarily have to involve you, but of course it's part of your life. And so it's happening more on the sense of what the children are experiencing, something they might be moving on from, or closing down, finishing, moving away from. And alternatively, if it's not something to do with children, it can be something to do with creativity, love affairs as well, but it's the South Node, so it's tending to let go, shedding, more like romantic relationships, not like long-term committed. It's like the beginning of a relationship. It's not really the long-term stuff, but that creativity is very much there. So maybe having a sense of also letting go of something that you thought was interesting and moving towards something that becomes a new way of expressing that. Yeah, that's quite nice. Somebody's just written now. Libra Sun and Gemini Rising, and Virgo Sun with Aries Rising. Okay, so let's start with the Libra Sun and the Gemini Rising. So hang on just a minute now. How do I get rid of this? There we go. So Gemini Rising that's going to be very interesting, because Gemini, first house, your first house of Gemini is going to be very strongly influenced just shortly after this conjunction by Mars, as I mentioned, 7 months. And that will be in your first house for 7 months, with Mars going back and forth, retrograde and then direct again till the spring of next year. So there's a lot of activity in your life when it's on an angular house, the first house or the 4th or the 7th or the 10th. It affects all of those houses. It's like the structure of your life. And so for Gemini Rising, this is actually happening in your 12th house. And that can be faraway lands. It can be places that are hidden in terms of both literally because they're too far away to see them, but also like the aspect of self, which is a little bit our blind spot. And so there may be something of a spiritual aspect to this for you. There can be something that is like an understanding. It's also the house of loss. The house traditionally is one of the houses associated with death and loss, letting go, but that doesn't have to mean a literal death. Although of course that also could be possible, but I would have to see the specific degrees of the chart. But when all of this is happening in the 12th house, there's going to be a lot of insight in terms of your own spiritual experience, but also potentially, because it's also known as the house of self-undoing, it can be that you realize, aha, this is what I'm doing to myself that is causing me suffering. The self-undoing is where we sabotage our own best interests. It can be addictions, it can be compulsive behavior, it can be just not seeing clearly, for example, what is necessary to see to be able to function well. You do have quite a lot of support because you have Jupiter in your house of friends and networks. So that's going to last with a little dip back into Pisces, but that will last until April, May of next year. So I don't know that that's going to be necessarily problematic for you. The 12th house is tricky because it's, like I said, it's kind of the blind spot. We don't really see what's there. It's more of a hidden aspect. Mars in the 12th can also make you very tired. Can make you feel kind of like low energy. That's the bad news for the Cancer risings, because we'll have 7 months of Mars in the 12th house. So that's kind of crappy. Like we're not tired enough as it is. Okay, Stefania is Virgo sun and Aries rising. And so Aries rising, okay, so this is going to happen in your 2nd house. So get a lottery ticket. This is where this can be issues around money. It can also be issues around family. The 2nd house is everything that supports you. Like we were talking about Taurus, everything that supports you, and in terms of the structure of the houses, that can include your family. It's whatever allows you to live materially in the world. And so in this case, it could be money, it can be issues around sustenance, food, income, the money that you earn from the work that you do. It can also be around values. There can be a sudden shift in your values that you really change. This is, I'm done now. That was one way of seeing my life. Now I want to see it this way. And that can come quite suddenly, where you're actually living in a completely different way, similar to the Cancer rising, where that can have an influence on how you choose to live in community, or how you choose to put your energy going forward, because it is it's the house of goals and dreams. So in the 2nd house, it's very much, it's also about your voice. It's both in the physical sense and the metaphysical sense. It's finding a voice. So this could be something that can show you a little bit about, and this is something coming in, by the way. So it's something you're bringing into your life in the 2nd house. And then the opposite end of that is the house of shared resources, the 8th house. And so something is, you're letting go of something there. That could be financial support. It could be something to do, again, 8th house is something to do with potentially with death and loss. It's transformation. So something that you're letting go. It can be fears as well. Like I mentioned, 8th house, especially in Scorpio, because you follow the natural houses, so it emphasizes even more strongly that meaning. You can be kind of suddenly freed from fear, freed from a sense of something that might have been holding you back. And
thank you, Susan.
You're welcome. And Catherine has, so okay, we've done that one. Vesta is on 21 of Taurus. Yeah, I wouldn't go that far. First of all, because Vesta is minor. 21 Taurus is too far away. I really think you should give it a very tight orb. If it were, for example, your sun or your moon or Venus or Mars or something of your own planets that were really like your inner planets that were really significant and on 21 degrees, I would say for sure include that. But Vesta, not really. It's these are asteroids that have a wide orb anyway, or a narrow orb anyway, because they're slow moving. And it's not something, it's very difficult with these asteroids to really know how exactly it can affect you in that sense. So I wouldn't do it. I would stick with the tight orb. Yeah, and Catherine, I know you've got a stellium in Gemini. What's your rising sign? I can't remember now.
Libra.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, okay. So where is Libra?
Yeah.
So yeah, for you, it's in the 8th house. That's intense. So in the 8th house, that is that is other people's money. So there's something new, and the exact opposite to what I was saying just now for Stefania with Aries. It's the opposite effect. So other people's money, and something new coming in there, some new experience of shared resources, some new experience that can also be an inheritance, or it can be something to do with opportunities that come in through other people. So it's not money you're earning yourself, it's stuff that's coming to you. That also, of course, is the house of marriage. That can trigger something quite sudden and long-term changing in marriage. And all kinds of partnership, because that can also be the house of business partners, what you earn from clients, for example. That would be in the eighth house, seventh house being clients, and eighth house is what you're earning from them. Another way of maybe saying that it could be something new coming in if you're developing a business model where you're working with clients. Yeah, and then of course the second house is where the south node is. So there's something that you're shedding there in the second house, which is money, what you earn, or things that you possess, like your stuff, your nice stuff, and that you might be saying goodbye to some of that, or deciding that actually you're done with it all. So right. If there's nobody else that wants to do that, then I think that's it. So any last questions? Anything you want to clarify or ask about? We have to leave this on a positive note. We can do this. We can do this. If our ancestors have been able to get through this kind of crap, then surely we can as well. I find it really helpful. By the way, Cancer and Capricorn is the axis of our ancestral lineage. It's the Capricorn is like the lineage of our forebears, but the Cancer is like the memory, the ancestral memory, and the connection to our roots, including our native roots, wherever you come from culturally, and not just the family that you're born into. And so keep that in mind. I take a lot of strength from knowing that my ancestors had a hell of a lot more difficulty than I ever did. And that they got me here. So the fact that I exist shows that it's possible to overcome enormous challenges. And for the rest, it's good to have a sense that it's out of our control. It's actually, I find, comforting to have a sense that we've never actually been in control. So the idea of trying to maintain control is more like a torture than if you just surrender. This is the ultimate spiritual practice, surrender.
And surrendering, that letting go from the old experience and where you are today. It's small, not practical, it sounds weird, but a small maybe exercising or things to consider that can help surrender.
Yeah.
Go with like breathing.
Yeah. So for example, like what we did when we started, lying down, practicing with the body. This is actually one of the most challenging practices to do, is to lie down and let go and realize how much of the body is actually holding on. So if you just go from your toes up to your head, or from your head down to your toes, whatever you like to do, or both, and just really practice, can I surrender my body to the floor? Can I trust the floor is there? Can I trust the earth is holding me up? And let go. And in that physical letting go, there's something that changes in us, in the sense of our mind is less grasping at something, because the mental tension is causing physical tension. So if you're lying down and it's like your shoulders are tense and you can't relax that, there's thoughts behind that. It's not random. And so the more that you can practice letting go in the most physical sense, you will find that psychologically and emotionally it becomes easier. I also find it really helpful to let go of objects that you surrender regularly. Yeah, do really regular sort of donations and cleansing and clearing, and and sharing, you know, that's a way of surrendering. It's like, oh, this I have to circulate this energy. I'm holding on to too many things. Surrendering also in a conscious way when you find that something is not going according to plan, even silly, you know, things like being stuck in traffic and practicing, okay, I can't do anything about this. You know, I'm stuck in a bus or I'm stuck in my car and I am not in control here. So I let go of the tension and the perhaps anger and frustration I might be feeling. And I surrender to this moment. And so it's in that little practical everyday stuff, particularly around the body, the physical body, that we can train ourselves to let go of the illusion of control. You see, when you're looking at other people, it's easier. When you see somebody who's really upset because things are not going their way, you know, like somebody's got road rage or they're upset because the queue in Deleuze is too long or something, they're like, and they're all like super annoyed. And you look at them and you think, you're really a complete idiot. And you realize how illogical, how irrational that response is, because what is that changing except that it's spreading your anger, your frustration around you. So practicing those little ways, the surrender is I have an appointment with myself every morning on my phone. It appears at 8:30. It's a mantra that says Idam Namama, and that means divine will, not my will. So this not my will. So I surrender. Doesn't mean I'm not doing anything. It means that I'm not going to force anything. I'm going to accept, okay, if I'm here, like I was the other day, amongst all these police officers for no obvious reason, I think, what do I have to learn from this situation? What is it that I'm needing to understand here? And in my interpretation of that, I was practicing letting go of the idea that I live a clean and innocent life and that I would never get embroiled in some kind of riots or something like that. Well, why not? Because you're going to the post office to pick up a random package. You can also be embroiled. So it's just training yourself to see that these things are out of our control. Of course, we can choose what we do, how we behave, and how we go forward, but it's not really in our control. And that when you understand that, it's liberating. And it doesn't mean we don't do anything. It means that we are not having to stress. It is all there. I remember one time in Rishikesh, I had this, so stressed because I went to this quite stupid, really absurd festival, this Kundalini yoga festival that I deeply regret having gone to, except that I learned enormous amounts, like in 2011. And it was so crazy that I had to leave the tent. I just couldn't stay there. And I went to there was like a group of Ayurvedic doctors that were there in case anybody got ill or if they wanted an appointment or whatever. And I just went to the doctor and I said, I can't calm myself down. I'm so annoyed. I'm hearing such craziness and I keep getting angry. I keep feeling myself getting really annoyed by this. And he just, as they so beautifully do, he said, just be like the Ganga, just be like the river flowing, let it wash through you and out and on. Don't let anything stay. And just in hearing that, I thought that is literally the only rational way to experience life. I can't do anything about this, so I just have to go like the river. It's the classical metaphor in every spiritual tradition is the river, because it's constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly purifying itself, moving on, and it's never the same twice. And so are we. You know, that Stoic expression that you can't step in the same river twice, because you're not the same and the river's not the same. So we have that fixity of mind that makes us believe that it's otherwise, but it's not. It's always going to be this way. So I leave it there, unless there are any questions from the team on Zoom. So otherwise, I wish you a wonderful Guru Purnima and have an uneventful couple of weeks ahead, I hope. And go with that flow of your own personal river, and keep in touch and let me know how things are transforming. So much love to all of you there.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye bye.